why has this government not requested that the US use their tracking capabilities to assure us that British-made parts are not being used in Gaza?
Well,
it seems that our contractual responsibilities to Lockheed Martin are trumping our responsibilities to international humanitarian law.
Nobody can fail to be moved by the horrific pictures we see on our television screens. What we're saying is, a Ministry of Defence, we also have to consider the programme that the F-35 is part of, which delivers peace and security in many parts of the world and defends our freedom.
Order, order. Welcome to today's session of the Business and Trade Select Committee, scrutinising licences for arms exports to Israel, despite the evidence that is potentially available, if not obvious. There was no judgment made by His Majesty's government on the conduct of hostilities. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. That's correct. There are often questions around establishing the exact evidence around, say, proportionality or intent of an individual strike or incident or otherwise.
We have tens of thousands of people dead, and yet that does not qualify as a reason.
That requires some understanding about what was going on in, for example, the targeting process or the decision about proportionality. So therefore, third parties often don't have access to that full picture of operational information.
You also have RAF flights. You've had hundreds of RAF flights flying over Gaza on a daily basis, so you can see the day-by-day destruction.
Maybe if Lord Kogan just wants to say about the RAF flights.
Sure. Well, let me maybe finish my sentence. So I'm just trying to probe further as to why this doesn't qualify and why this is such an unknown. Because you're seeing RAF flights. I think they've been flying over since, I think, more than 12 months now. So you're seeing day by day the destruction. You know it's more than 50,000 buildings destroyed.
We haven't got a shortage of information that is available to you about the scale of destruction.
No, I mean, it's just, I mean, just to say the purpose of the RAF, I understand the point you're making is about the general picture, the horrific picture that it paints with respect to Gaza. I understand that. Just to clarify, the purpose of the RAF flights was to look for the hostages and to see whether the hostages could be found by the use of the surveillance planes. That's the whole purpose of the RAF planes.
Okay, following up on that, does that mean you're not analysing them for any other reason?
Well, in terms of that information that we use, the information we use is purely and simply used in terms of hostage and seeing whether we can locate the hostages and if necessary sharing that.
So you're not using it to work out what is going on in terms of destruction beyond that? That you're ignoring that data?
Well, we're not ignoring it, but we're not using it for that purpose.
Have you sought that information from the Ministry of Defence?
In terms of officials' engagement with the MOD?
We have not sought it, as to the best of my knowledge, Chair, we have not asked for that information from RAF flights. I don't think we are in any doubt as officials about the level of destruction that has happened, but part of the challenge we face is around the nature of international humanitarian law, which is a relatively flexible body of law which has a threshold that is much higher than many people appreciate.
We just talked at some length really about the use of RAF spy planes. It seems that we've got some information, might be in a different department, but there is information available to the UK government. The Israeli ambassador to the UK even went on record and said, what did Britain do to Dresden? And therefore the logic of that is that they want to flatten and destroy Gaza.
If you drop a £2,000 bomb into a densely urban area, I mean, what do you need to understand about the intent in order not to come to a judgment that that was just completely wrong?
But I mean, there's a question of saying it is completely wrong versus saying, is it a violation of international humanitarian law? That sounds callous, but that is the difficult judgment that we have to make. And
so the judgment you've arrived at is that that was potentially a legal act of war? The judgment that we are making, we are not setting out as officials to provide a complete analysis of Israel's compliance with IHL. which brings us to the intriguing mystery of why F-35 parts are still being allowed to be exported.
There is no particular appetite anywhere for changes to that. It's been discussed at official levels. It requires international agreement with all the partner nations that are part of the F-35 international collaboration agreement.
We just need to try and understand a little bit more about what is being exported here. So, as you'd expect, we took the step of writing to Lockheed Martin to ask for evidence ahead of this session, and I received their reply last night. Lockheed Martin say that they are not authorised to release information about the programme without the approval of the Joint Programme Office, and the US Department of Defence has advised that any questions the committee has about the programme should be directed to the US government. Now, I would prefer not to do that, so we're going to ask you the questions, Minister Coker.
The F-35 components are made, the Joint Programme Office from the United States will order parts, components that, so for example, ejector seats, rear tail parts of the F-35. The value is something where we estimate the value in terms of what's provided by this country is approximately 15%. They are then exported from the UK to the US, either to assemble the aircraft or to become part of the global pool of parts. As when they leave the UK then loses sight in terms of where they go, but they go into that global pool either for planes to that need them to be replaced or to be assembled as part of the assembly programme for the making of the initial F-35s.
And would we lose the contract if we said no to the US and Lockheed Martin?
We believe that if we unilaterally tried to do that, we would risk being taken out of the overall collaboration of contracts, and that would undermine the whole F-35 project.
Why are the F-35 parts untrackable?
When they leave this country to go to the US and become the property of the US government, become the property within the US. So we don't track them from them. We lose, in that sense, we lose sight of them once they leave the UK.
Would it be technically possible to actually track them using sort of
Well,
a NATO codification system?
Excuse me. Well, they are tracked, but they're tracked by the US. The US will track them as to where they go. It's not tracked by the UK.
But they are technically tracked.
They're tracked by the US. The US can track them. The only place where the UK, if we're talking about, you can stop parts from entering the programme is at the UK border. That would be, if we're talking about UK components, it's at the border. That's where because once they go out, they're not our property.
It seems that our contractual responsibilities to Lockheed Martin are trumping our responsibilities to international humanitarian law. And that is what I think many people on this committee object to.
Yeah.
And do you agree with that?
I understand that. I understand the point you're making. Nobody can fail to be moved by the horrific pictures we see on our television screens. What we're saying is a Ministry of Defence, as a Department for Defence, and I'm saying as a Defence Minister, alongside that horror, we also have to consider, which is what the advice that went from the Secretary of State to those who take the decision about export licensing, is the programme that the F-35 is part of, which delivers peace and security in many parts of the world and defends our freedom.
Given that we are such close allies with the other partners in the F-35 programme, that we are building fighter planes together, why has this government not requested that the US use their tracking capabilities to assure us that British-made parts are not being used in Gaza?
Well, the overall picture that we've done, there have been, as we say, discussions, always discussions that go on.
Given your assessment that there is a serious risk of a breach of international humanitarian law, it's difficult for us to understand how you're honouring Article 7 of the Arms Trade Treaty.
I'm not going to get into the detail of matters that are arguable.
Well, I'm asking you for the detail.
Yeah.
And parliamentary scrutiny and,
yes,
and accountability to
absolutely.
Parliament is a critical bit of the
Completely
legality of your decision taking.
Absolutely, completely understand that, Chair. But we have a series of obligations, as you say, under the Arms Trade Treaty, under our own criteria and others, that are all considered as part of this process. And the advice that we've received, those are consistent with the decisions that have been reached.
In your submission to the courts on the 15th of November,
it says in black and white that the government accepts that the F-35 exports may be used to breach international humanitarian law. So you've said it yourself, and I cannot understand how you can see it as compatible with your obligations under the Arms Trade Treaty.
We've set out the case, we've set out the reasons for the decision, the totality of all of the legal obligations, the context on the ground, and the reasons that Lord Coke has set out has been considered. It's been considered in the round, and that's what the Secretary of State for Business and Trade has made the decision on the basis of.
Okay. Well, there is a vote in the House, and so this sitting is suspended. If there was a case of Saved by the Bell, I think this is it. I'm not convinced, Minister Doughty, by your explanation of the UK's compatibility between this decision and the Arms Trade Treaty, I'm afraid.